Well, hello everyone. Today we're going to be casting a lid to an intake manifold using the lost foam process. I'm just going to walk you through the process that I'm going to use and hopefully get a video of the actual casting and demolding here at the end of the day. So first thing, the subject is it's an old intake manifold that has some historical significance in one of the old Trans Am racing development programs. It happens to be a Ford part. But I received this intake as shown, and it has what's probably a homemade sheet metal intake, which isn't the original part. But I do know of one other in existence, and the fellow is an acquaintance of mine, and he was gracious enough to supply me with the information that I needed to make a reproduction of the original lid. So that's what today's project is. So you can see the manifold itself, all of its intricate land work and porting. So the project will be to make a intake manifold lid that cosmetically appears identical to the original, and of course is functional and interfaces with all the intake manifold features. So I'm not going to go into great detail about how the pattern was made. There's a pretty detailed build thread at thehomefoundry.org. I'll provide a link in the comments section after the video is posted. But I will just briefly show you how I got to the pattern part. First, I'll take the manifold away. And I used a decidedly very old school method to do that, which is just a hand-guided template system on a pin router or overarm router. Some of you that have seen my videos have seen that before. I kind of feel like I beat that to death, so I'm not going to go into great detail here other than to show you that I made these medium density fiber board templates. And although I've got a CNC router, I'm still learning how to use it, and this would have been a very, very challenging CAD modeling project for me. And the curves are pretty complex with all the intersections, and not a single thing was perfectly symmetric. So I resorted to a very old school method, which is I just measured, laid it out, and provided for shrink by hand, and by the amount of shrink that I've found in practice works very well for me, and translated it onto this particular pattern. Once I had the profile, I was able to cut a couple other identical ones for the subsequent patterns, one of which I made into the webbing. But this one, of course, provided all the detail for all the underside details and features of the intake manifold lid. And a foam pattern was mounted on top of it with two-sided tape, just nothing special. And then the foam pattern and the under features were cut out. Then it was mounted on this pattern, which contains all the features that you see or will see in the top of the pattern. So similarly, the second cuts were made with the foam pattern, again taped to this pattern for mounting, and then all of the features were used on this to transfer to the top of the pattern. So one other little detail is the intake manifold has some lettering on it, so I made a similar pattern or guide pattern for that, because the letters, they were an inch tall and about 3/16 line weight. And sometimes I make details like this out of wax, but I just thought that those were too big for wax. So I made a pattern to cut them out of foam, which I'll show you here in a minute. But getting rid of the patterns. The aftermath of that was a foam pattern that looks like you see here. So after that entire process, I got a pattern that looked just like the manifold top I wanted to make on that. This particular one has been coated in refractory slurry already, so that's why it's all this blue-gray color, because that's the color of the slurry. Here are the features on the bottom side of that, cut from the templates, as you can see. And the thing that you can't see on this, or that's a little bit more difficult to see, is the gating that I've added. And basically everything below this surface here that you can see going around where all the boss work is, everything from this point on down is gating and runner system to feed the intake manifold. And if you want to see how I cut all that and matched it up to the pattern, I'm afraid you're going to have to go join the homefoundry.org and take a look at the thread, but there's a pretty detailed description there. But the net effect of it is that I've got a part that will sit in the mold like this at a slightly canted angle, if you can see that. And then this gate and runner system will feed the entire part. And I found in practice that when I have very large parts, this part is almost 2 feet long, end to end. I found that it's pretty challenging at sensible pour temperatures to get the aluminum to flow that far through a part because it tends to chill in a very thin-walled part like that. So if you make a more generous, thicker cross-section runner system to distribute the molten metal across the part, you usually have a higher degree of success. So anyway, more on that in a little bit. I'm going to use, I made a molding rig some years ago that vibrates the sand in place. For a part this big, I'm going to have to use my larger version of that because the mold itself will be almost 350 pounds of sand, and I can't sling that around myself. So I'll go into detail on that. And maybe just before we leave the pattern discussion, I mentioned, pattern routing the letters, and these are all the leftover letters. Once I made the pattern, the letters themselves were very cheap. They came very fast, just a minute or so to cut them on that. And when I cut them, they were over 1 inch thick, the block letters were, and then I just took them to my hot wire cutter and sliced them 3/16 of an inch thick, and now I've got oodles and oodles of 1 inch size letters that are easy to make now on that. A couple other things, you've seen it from my previous videos. I use reusable pouring cups that are made out of moldable ceramic foam. This is the one I usually use of this size, but for this part, because of its size, it'll probably, with gating and all, it'll probably be around 13 pounds. So I'll probably have 15 or 16 pounds of metal in the pot when I pour it. And when the pours get that large, I use this larger reusable pouring basin, which you can see there. It has a slightly different shape, but you can see at the bottom, it has a weir, which is a little gate that helps with the pouring characteristics. And then I have this saddle that it sits on. So after I pour the molten aluminum into it, I grab the saddle with a pair of pliers and extract the pouring cup and turn it upside down. So the only thing that's left in there is a thin aluminum skin, and I can pull that out and reuse the pouring cup. So a couple other things here on this particular project. So this is a chunk that I cut off the sprue. The sprue is 1 1/4 inches square. It's made out of a very low density styrene foam. The pattern itself is machined from an extruded polystyrene that's about 1.3 pounds per cubic foot. This stuff is about 0.85 pounds per cubic foot. And the reason I do that is one, it's this cheap recycled stuff I've got, but two, it's less energy to consume from the melt to have to melt the lower density foam. And using it in the gating system means that it probably penetrates that foam much faster than the denser foam, and I can more rapidly fill the feed system before I fill the part, and then I think that aids in getting a complete, more uniform fill of the part. So that's that. And then the last thing is that you can see sitting in the background there my crucible. It's an A20 crucible. And you can also see behind it a rather large ingot that's about 3 feet long. That's about a 35-pound ingot. I use A356 for most of my casting. It's a good all-round casting alloy. And I used to use recycled or scrap automotive parts, and then my sources from that at the automotive shops started charging me $1 a pound for scrap, and I could get virgin ingot delivered to me for a little under twice that. So I just stopped using recycled aluminum for that because I'd rather use just clean metal that I know the chemistry of for that difference for what I'm doing and what I've invested in the time to make the parts. I'd rather use a known alloy. So I take that big ingot and I slice it into pieces that are, more manageable for me to charge the crucible with here on the table saw. Just use a little wax on a rip blade, on a carbide rip blade, and you might be surprised how easy it is to cut through a chunk of aluminum like that with a, good power table saw. But that's the primer for all this. I'm going to do a couple more excerpts for you on the molding process, which some of you have seen before, maybe not on my larger molding rig, and then hopefully capture the actual pour and demolding, and hopefully a happy outcome. So stay tuned, and I'll rejoin you here in a moment. Okay, I'm back with you. So just a quick tour of my larger molding rig here. This is a vibratory sand molding rig made from a 30-gallon barrel. It's got vibratory vibrators or turbine vibrators all around the perimeter of it, and it's also got a large one on the bottom of it. It can be tilted and pivoted, and it's also mounted on springs, and the reason for that is that if it's on an unstable platform, it just helps be able to excite the sand with a little bit lower energy level, which is helpful when you get into big molds, because this mold's going to be almost 300 pounds on that. So one thing I made for this rig was a sifting unit, and all the sifting unit is an extender that sits on top of it like so, and I made this little perforated screen that sits in there, so when I'm done with casting, I just shovel the sand in, and it sifts the sand and gets rid of any debris or so on. And the other thing it can do is that you can use this extender as kind of a method to shower the sand into the flask, so you get a more uniform distribution of the sand initially before you vibrate it. But because this pattern is so deep, I'm not going to be able to do that, because I'm going to have to use it as a flask extender to get the additional depth on all that. So one other thing that you can do with the molding rig is, because you can tilt it, you can vibrate the mold at different angles, which can be helpful for getting at difficult parts. But for me, it also is helpful in this, that I can get the mold at an angle, so I don't have to completely empty the mold when I start to put the part in. So here, for me, I'm going to do that because this particular part I want the pouring cup to be at the back on this side, because that's I've got a little assist here where I put a steady rest in, and this when I get into the bigger crucibles, it's a little bit heavier for me to do that. But anyway, I'll pack this mold, and you can see here what we've got, but I'm going to actually ladle the sand in about a quart at a time, because I'm going to try to fill this very carefully so I support the sand or the pattern on either side and not deflect the mold, or not deflect the pattern with the weight of the sand. So I'm going to take a few minutes to do that, and I'm not a big fan of long videos, so I figure you're not that interested in watching me hand pack this mold, a quart at a time. It'll take 5 or 10 minutes to do that. But what I'm going to do is I'm going to fill it to the point where I can put the flask extender on, and then I'll rejoin you and show you the vibration packing of the mold. All right, I'm back with you. I just ladled the sand in there with a quart cup a little bit to support the pattern. So now I'm going to straighten it out a little bit, level the mold up. Then I'm going to continue filling the mold. And I don't know if you can see it very well or not, but that's now you can kind of see it in there, and I've got more sand to fill in, but basically I'm going to fill this flask up near the top of the mold, and then I'll turn on some vibration, and I'll be back with you in just a second. Okay, back with you. I've got the flask filled up to the top of the sprue. It's time to install the pouring cup that I showed you earlier. So I'm just going to set that right on top of the sprue, wedge it on there just a little bit, and then commence to fill in the rest up to the top of the pouring cup. I actually have a little bit more room to spare than I thought. I cut an inch off the sprue. I could have used the extra inch or two of sprue height. Hopefully that won't matter much, but we'll pour a little of it in here. Then kind of encourage it around all sections here of the pouring cup. And a little more. At this stage of the mold filling, the vibration isn't quite as critical, but I'll turn it on anyway to try to get it to fill in around the cup and seal the sprue nicely. So here we go. I'll turn the vibe back on, and then I'll leave you, and next step will be time to pour. Alright, I'm back with you. That's all I fibbed. It wasn't next step pour, but just wanted to show you the mold filled. I filled it up to the top, near the top of the pouring cup. I do that because even that couple inches of depth of pouring cup, if you don't get sand up the side of it, that's enough pressure to cause the molten metal to leak out at the surface. So this way, there's plenty of sealing around where the sprue and the cup are. But it truly is ready to pour now, so I've had metal in the pot. It's time to wheel the flask outside. Finally got a pretty decent day to pour after several days of nothing but rain. I've got 50s and partly sunny and a little breezy, but nice pouring conditions. So onward and upward, and join you again in just a few minutes. Okay, the moment of truth is here. I'm going to do the final skim and pour it. We'll see what happens. Mild breeze, shouldn't be too much of a factor, but bombs away. we'll see what happens. You know, a little bit more flame and smoke than I would have liked. Probably not the best pour by me as far as targeting the spot and keeping the pour going, but a little bit of smoke that obscured the cup there for a while. But we'll see what happens. I tried to keep it on it. We'll find out in a minute. Stand by. Alright, well, I guess now comes the real moment of truth, the demolding time. So this casting's big enough. I usually quench the castings in a 5-gallon bucket, but this was too wide for a 5-gallon bucket, so I borrowed my wife's grandma's 25-gallon pickle crock. She went walking by and I thought I was going to catch the stick from her from doing it, but she just kind of shrugged her shoulders about it. So anyway, I think best use for that thing I found yet. So alright, well, here it goes. Well, the initial indications are pretty good. I'll have to get it quenched and cleaned off, but let's see what we got here. Alright, well, I learned not to count my chickens before they're hatched. It looks like a full part, but you never know about the details until you get the refractory off of it and get a closer look at it. So I'll do that, and I'll rejoin you, and we'll take a closer look at what we've got there. Stay tuned. Okay, I'm back with you, and the jury's back. The verdict's in, and I think we've got a pretty good part. So all I did was I cut the sprue off the top because it's kind of hard to handle with that, and I had this little bob here down on the end. I put that down there because I had an art caster one time tell me that he put bobs on them to basically chase out the initial part of the pour that was full of oxides. This is a dinky little thing. The other thing it tells you is how much heat you've got, if you got spare heat. And it looks like I had plenty of heat. I didn't coat this one, so it's got a rough finish on that. But I mean, it was just a dinky little bob that probably would have only amounted to, you know, this much more of the casting. But I cut that off of there to help it lay flat. And as far as the details on the casting, I think you can see it's a pretty solid. It's a very nice casting, and this one might be a one and done for me, and I only need one part, so we'll see about that. There is one caveat, though, that I'll point out to you before we're finished looking at it here. But here's the top, and you can see that I've got a lot of work to do, you know, to remove all the gating. I was thinking about doing that on the table saw, but I think I got to set it up on the mill to reach it all anyway, and I don't want to do anything stupid. Removing the gating, you know, having gone to all that work to get the casting, and if I set it up on the mill, I'm pretty sure that, you know, I can do that. So looking at the underside, so everything's there. I mean, it's basically a perfect reproduction of the pattern. I mean, everything came through. You can see all the gate work, the pattern finish, the gating finish. I mean, it's a nice solid casting. And the only thing that did happen is I've got about a 1/4 inch of warp from here to here. This ends up. And I don't think that's casting warp. I think what happened was when I was tilting the mold and vibrating the casting, one part of the mold settled over more to the side than the other, and it deflected the pattern. And in hindsight, what I should have done is just fill the entire thing with the pattern completely vertical, so the sand was just vibrating and compacting equally on each side. I was trying to get some of the details and to fill in, but you know, when you got a foam pattern, they're not that strong when you have 300 pounds of sand, you know, in a mold. But we'll see what happens. That's a lot to move the casting. When they're in the state that they're in right now, they're very soft. And I can probably bend that. I'm a little sheepish about going all the way, a quarter inch on it. A little straightening on the casting is pretty normal. I'm afraid that much I might break it. And but the thing is that I'm going to have to straighten it, probably to remove the gating, and for sure to use it as a part. So there'll be another moment of truth when that comes around. But if we take a look at some of the detail here, if I hold up and let you look at the lettering there, the lettering, you know, it's every bit as good as what the pattern was. Same thing with that right there. So yeah, if you look at the details, you know, on the boss work and so on, it's I'm pretty happy with it. So if I can deal with that little bit of warpage out here on the very end, it's going to be a one and done success. Maybe I'll move it a little bit and then maybe go through a little annealing or whatnot on it. We'll see. But anyway, this is just as cast with a quick visit to the media blast cabinet, and so success. So I'll come back to you a little later when I get to the degating part and straightening. All right, I'm back with you one more time here. I degated everything off of the casting and cleaned it up a little bit, and machined the back side, just machined the gating off. I haven't finished machined anything yet, but as you can see, it looks pretty decent. Very happy with the casting. I was able to straighten it too. It's not perfectly flat right now, but it's passably flat. I'd say within 30 thousandths from corner to corner. I'll be able to tweak it a little bit more. It just takes a little bit of time, applying pressure in the right spots. The casting's still very soft, so it's easy to move around. So no problem straightening out that little warp here in the end of it. And yeah, the top of the casting looks very good. You can see the lettering, everything, all the detail. It came out very nicely, very nicely. So very happy with it. This is looking like it's going to be a one and done. So I checked just quickly. You can maybe see I put little black dots in the center of all the bosses. So I took the machine plate and laid it on top of there, and you're not going to be able to see it, but as far as shrink, it looks like I did pretty good. All the black dots are in the center of the holes. Might be one that's a little tight on that, but for the most part, I think it looks pretty darn good. And then as far as it lining up on the intake here, I won't know for sure until I cut a gasket and you know, get the exact trace of the underneath and see how things lay up there. But you can see it fits pretty nicely on the intake. So this is going to be a good one, I think. So pretty simple machining left. I just got to, you know, do the final tweaking to get it straight. Sitting pretty nice though on there right now. But simple skim cut off the top. The letters, the carb pads are all at the same height. I'll probably take somewhere between 30 and 60 thousandths off. And then it's just drilling the through holes for the bolts and the carb pad holes, and do a little cleanup skim pass cut on the bottom side for the gasket, so it's got a nice finish on it. and this one is going to be in the record books. So pretty happy with it. Glad it came out. You know, there's always that moment when you go to pour where you're just you're wondering what's going to come out the other side. But this one's a good one and a happy ending. Thanks a lot. Take care, and we'll see you around. And if you want to see the details again of how this was built, go to thehomefoundry.org, and I'll put a direct link to this particular project in the comment section of the video here. So thanks for watching.